Welcome to the Compass series of conversations with leaders charting the course in impact investing, and thank you for joining us. I'm Ben Thornley from Tideline, dialing in today from Ecosperity Week in Singapore. We're excited in the next hour to be shining the spotlight on a relatively new and rapidly emerging group of impact investors deploying catalytic capital at scale, healthcare organizations and health-focused foundations. To help introduce that topic and to co-host today's discussion, I'm thrilled to be joined by Colby Daly, a co-founder of Multiplier Advisors. We'll invite a wonderful group of panelists to join us shortly, but before we do, a little more background. Colby and I have a long history of partnership, going back 15 years and including work together at Pacific Community Ventures, a community development finance institution. We focused in those early years on the critical role of government in building the impact investing market, something we've been reminded of most recently, specifically in the US, through the IRA and its effect on climate investment. After Pacific Community Ventures, Colby helped to launch the National Center Connecting Healthcare and Community Development Build Healthy Places Network. And with the benefit of that experience, Colby founded Multiplier Advisors as the first impact consultant uniquely designed to support health-focused investors. Finally, just last week, in a full circle moment, Tideline and Multiplier announced a formal strategic partnership. Combining Multiplier's deep understanding of the healthcare institutional context and Tideline's experience in impact investing strategy, we are together targeting to unlock an additional $5 billion of investment focused on the social determinants of health in the next 5 years. Welcome, Colby, and thank you for Multiplier's partnership. It's over to you to take it from here.
Thank you, Ben. And really, this is a full circle moment, one we're very excited about. As Ben said, I'm Colby Daly, co-founder of Multiplier Advisors, the first impact consultant uniquely founded to support health-focused investors in the US in their journeys to advance race and health equity and the social determinants of health. For those new to health parlance, social determinants of health are the factors in the environments where people are born, live, learn, work, and play that affect a wide range of health and quality of life outcomes. These are factors like quality jobs, affordable housing, safe neighborhoods, good education, and cultural belonging. In healthcare, we apply a river metaphor describing social determinants of health interventions as quote unquote upstream. We also use midstream and downstream to describe interventions addressing individual social needs and individual clinical care, respectively. For example, a healthy life, like a healthy river, most often begins in a healthy environment upstream and is impacted by social determinants over time, which then determine the level and type of interventions a person needs midstream and downstream. Healthcare systems' missions are to improve health, yet policy and funding constraints keep the business focused on treating sickness. Often, these are preventable chronic conditions caused by poor upstream factors. At the same time, health investors are spending dollars on addressing social determinants of health upstream, sometimes in ways they don't quantify or even know about. So to support our clients, Multiplier applies what we call the whole river paradigm. This is an approach that enables and supports health systems as they identify and align their existing assets, addressing upstream, midstream, and downstream factors so that they can be more mission aligned while gaining business operating efficiencies. Our panelists today will speak more to how impact investing is an upstream-focused tool to advance health and race equity and address the social determinants of health. It's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed group of panelists joining us today. Reggie Gordon is the president and CEO of Richmond Memorial Health Foundation, formerly a board trustee there, helping to lead the foundation through the process of becoming one of the country's premier health foundations, advancing race equity through its PRIs and an endowment with 40% allocated to impact investing. Mikkel Moore is my partner and co-founder of Multiplier Advisors, and she's also the former Chief Community Health Officer of Intermountain Health, where she led the creation of Intermountain's $200 million impact investing strategy, one component of a comprehensive strategy for aligning business operations with mission. John Vu is the Vice President of Strategy and Community Health at Kaiser Permanente. Among many responsibilities, he currently leads the team that oversees KP's Thriving Communities Fund, a $400 million impact investing fund deploying capital to advance affordable housing and economic development in low-income and predominantly BIPOC communities. And last but not least, Dave Zuckerman is the president and founder of the Healthcare Anchor Network, or HAN, which convenes over 70 of the country's preeminent health systems committed to an anchor mission, many of whom are signatories to a place-based investing pledge committing over $1 billion in combined impact investments. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for your important contributions to building the health impact marketplace. All right, I'm going to turn to questions now, and Dave, I'm turning to you first to help us set the stage. Love to hear you say more about HAN, its members, who are the members, what have these members committed, and what is the anchor mission? How is impact investing a critical component?
Thanks, Colby. It's really wonderful to be here with you all. And so the Healthcare Anchor Network was founded in early 2017 when 11 systems came together to say that they really needed a space focused on how health systems can go as far upstream as possible, to think deeply about a transformative vision and a practical framework for addressing racial and economic inequities. And that is really what we seek to do at the Healthcare Anchor Network, is to catalyze health systems to think differently about the assets they have in order to drive equitable economic development and create economic opportunities in their communities, and really get at addressing those root causes and community conditions that drive many of the individual social needs that, as you noted, that health systems are also addressing more in that midstream environment. And Han, we seek to raise the floor of what healthcare is doing in this area by changing the narrative, and we also want to raise the bar through working with the leading edge, including Intermountain, where Mikkel formerly was at, Kaiser Permanente, where John currently is, to say what is possible for health systems in leveraging all their resources to really drive change in place. And that is where our frame of the anchor institution and the anchor mission comes in, which is to recognize that health systems in communities across the country are the largest employers. And for the most part, they're nonprofit or publicly owned. And we think this combination of ownership and this combination of size really puts them in a unique position to think differently for the long term about the resources they have to drive change in place. And when you couple that in partnership with health conversion foundations, which are also focused on place, and other large place-based actors like universities, local government, you really have a powerful force, a new table of institutions that can come together that can think differently about the resources they have. So it's not just about, okay, what grant can we provide? But actually, we hire a lot of people. So can we think intentionally about the workforce pipelines? We also purchase a lot of things. So can we think differently about the local and diverse businesses we support? And for the purpose of this conversation, we hold large amounts of reserves or endowments that are traditionally invested in stocks and bonds on Wall Street. Perhaps we've applied an ESG screen. We moved in the mission-related direction. But is there really an opportunity to carve out a portion of that portfolio to reinvest back in Main Street, reinvest back in the places that these institutions are serving, that they also have the data around where the greatest inequities are present, and work with community partners, CDFIs, community development corporations, other place-based, community-based organizations to deploy that capital to address the upstream community conditions, affordable housing, capital for Black and brown businesses, other types of innovative ways through childcare centers, et cetera. So that's where we exist as Han to do, is to really provide that framework for our health systems, and then to track the data on what health systems are doing in that space. And I think we have the most robust capacity for tracking data around healthcare doing this place-based impact investing nationally. It's still a small number. Our estimate is that there's roughly about 20 systems that have active strategies. But as you noted, that is still more than $1 billion allocated to this work, of which about $600 million are deployed actively to projects in their communities. And it really represents what we think is the potential for this strategy. You know, HAN has 75 members, as you noted. It's just under 40% of nonprofit healthcare. So there's a lot of opportunity even within the Healthcare Anchor Network to expand that number of those systems committed to these investments and then to move to the rest of healthcare. Just very briefly, before I turn it over to the other colleagues on the panel, our position is that right now, leadership in this space looks like allocating 1% of your portfolio to impact investing. And I was previously on the board of a Conversion Health Foundation in DC that made that commitment. So I think Conversion Health Foundations for sure can make this commitment. I also think that health systems can make this commitment. It will not impact their bottom line, and the potential impacts in the community around their goals for community health and well-being are so significant that the small amount that they give up in terms of concessionary rate far outweigh the benefits that will be created in communities around affordable housing and other things that they're seeking to address at scale.
Thank you, Dave. Great points, and excited to hear more from our other panelists. I'm going to actually move to you, John. As a founding, Kaiser Permanente is a founding member of HAN, one of the largest investors within the membership with the $400 million allocated to your Thriving Communities Fund. Would love to hear from you what KP is hoping to achieve with the fund and how the fund supports the overarching mission and strategy of Kaiser Permanente.
Yeah. Thank you, Colby, and thank you, Ben, for having me on this and putting this together. And I'm really glad that Colby and Dave went before me because they so eloquently framed a couple of the key components of what this is all about. I think, Colby, the idea of a whole river, you know, downstream, midstream, upstream, is part of the mentality that it drives us in our work. And Dave, you know, all assets in to work on downstream, midstream, upstream levers is the mechanism to get there. And so just a quick kind of origin story for us, very brief. You know, as a health, an organization set up to deliver health, for decades, we were set up to provide really great world-class medical care and coverage. We did that. We did some midstream stuff, but a lot of it was downstream. We provided really good care. When you're broke, we try to fix you. When you're ailing, we try to make you better. We try to create wellness. Now, we went upstream a little bit. We have really good prevention. We have health education classes. We even think about sort of early onset issues. But around 20 or so years ago, we started realizing that people were staying sick or not getting fully well or living the fullest lives they could because there were other factors going on, hence the social determinants of health and all the science that has come with that now. But once we realized that, the real question was strategically, what do we do about it? What do we as an organization of nurses, doctors, you know, medical assistants, health plan, insurance coverage, actuaries do around things like that Colby has mentioned and Ben mentioned around affordable housing availability, food insecurity, job opportunity, all of that, and the equities that underlie all of that. What's our rightful place in that? But we started to embrace that we can do something about that. And then that's when we started thinking about what is our voice? How do we advocate for things? What are policy changes we can make? How do we use grant funding? How do we partner with communities? So we did a lot of that activity. At some point, though, we ran into the limitations of that. And that's when this whole idea of an anchor assets and an anchor mindset really came in. How do we actually use all of our business assets for good and not do it just because for good corporate social responsibility, because of good ESG, or sort of just good philanthropy, but really because it matters to our business and our business's health. And we need all of those things activated that way. And so Dave kind of laid all those out really well, and we started doing those things. How do we hire differently? How do we purchase differently? And how do we invest differently? And hence our Thriving Communities Fund was born out of that. We went to, and all of this was sort of centered in our community health department of our organization, not in finance, not in treasury, not in HR, but we had to be kind of a little bit of the glue and the catalyst to drive that. So one day we went to our treasury department and said, look, we're hearing about this thing, impact investing. We have huge balance sheet holdings. How do we actually unleash that differently? How do we dedicate some of that with very purposeful, deliberate, intentional investments around community development and addressing inequities and driving some of these social determinants of health? So we freed up a couple $100 million. We went looking for partners who could do these kinds of investments well. We focused on affordable housing and economic opportunity. We got a little bit of experience under our belt. We decided let's double it, and today it's at 400 million. And we're constantly looking at how do we continue to grow. We have about 300 million of it deployed today in various investments. And it's really to kind of be catalytic. We're not going to solve the affordable housing crisis in California or in Hawaii or in Washington, D.C. with just that fund alone. But when a Kaiser Permanente can kind of step up and lean in a community and say, here's 10 million for this, here's 20 million for that, here's 50 million for that, you know, it draws it. We've seen that it's drawn in other investors, other partners, and other like-minded organizations. So I think that's a little bit of the history of, and the why we do these investments and the kind of the aims that we're driving towards.
Thanks so much, John. And just, you know, KP's leadership coming into the field and really catalyzing, as you say, has been tremendous. I'm going to turn, Reggie, to you now. You have a different perspective as a health foundation and a health conversion foundation. I'm going to throw one curveball at you to see if you could just say a word to the audience about what is a what's a health conversion foundation. But we also want to hear from you. You know, you were one of the earliest health foundations to implement impact investing and with an explicit racial equity lens. So would love to hear from you, in addition to sort of the role of a health conversion foundation, how impact investing fits as a tool for you as it aligns with grant making and your other activities, and the unique role the foundation can play as a leader in the field for advancing equity.
Thank you, Colby. Thank you, Ben. Hello, everyone. Okay, so I'm in Richmond, Virginia. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and when I grew up here, there was a hospital called Richmond Memorial Hospital on the north side of town. It was really active in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And then the landscape changed with hospital systems, but they had a corpus of money and reserves that they used to work on issues that related to the maintenance of the hospital and its programs. In 1977, that's when it began to have a Richmond Memorial Hospital Foundation that managed the corpus of those funds. And then by 1998, the time had come for the hospital to, in essence, close. There was a successor hospital that was created. And those assets from the corpus of that Richmond Memorial Hospital turned into the money that we use for the Richmond Memorial Health Foundation. So we're a hospital legacy foundation. And we try to live on the precepts and goals of that community hospital that was open to all in Richmond in those days. We have been in existence for 25 years as the Richmond Memorial Hospital Foundation, and our mission is to foster an equitable and healthy Richmond region. We have 14 members on our board of trustees and 6 staff. And we've been on this journey for about equity in earnest since 2015. Around 2015, there was lots of conversations in our community about race and the social determinants of health. There was a report that was produced by a local university, Virginia Commonwealth University, that indicated that life expectancy in our city, a city of around 230,000 people, varied widely by your zip code. In fact, a 20-year disparity based on zip code. And that was highly correlated to race. So shortly thereafter, the trustees of the foundation realized that we needed to move beyond what we call transom grants, which related specifically just to clinics and things that had a purely practical health connection to the social determinants of health. And we hired my predecessor, which is Mark Constantine, to begin to go on a learning journey to figure out what does that mean for a foundation like ours. We are, our size is small, maybe relative to other foundations, but we realize our influence could be social and moral and intellectual, and our reputation and financial. And that's how we moved into understanding and appreciating impact investing as one way that we could evolve with our grant making. We hired an outsourced chief investment officer with Northern Trust to educate all of us, including the board, and to deepen our understanding. And we made a significant portion of our investments to ESG and other select funds with diverse managers. The chair of our investment committee and the chair of our program and evaluation committee began to meld together so that they could share knowledge and work in concert. And then we, over time, have become the local convener of other foundations, the United Way, other funders in this health and racial equity space. We've created the RVA Racial and Health Equity Funders Group. We've had a few meetings so far working on definitions about health equity, racial equity, and a shared strategy that we hope will be incorporated, sort of goes full circle to the regional strategy for economic mobility in Richmond, which is spearheaded by the Chamber of Commerce and other key leaders. That's our story.
Thank you, Reggie. And, you can kind of see the through line connecting these place-based efforts and the way that partners can come together. So really appreciate those comments. I'm going to turn now to Mikkel. Mikkel, it's such a joy to work with you at Multiplier now. And our partnership extends back for more than a year when you brought Multiplier in as a consultant when you were leading the impact work at Intermountain Health. Intermountain was also one of the first health system impact investors, a member of HAN, and I would love to hear from you what the approach was while you were there, and help us understand too, so the different drivers and strategic considerations that were part of the decision making when you're in as a more regional presence versus, for example, the KP more national presence.
Thank you, Colby. And the pleasure is mine. It's a thrill to be in partnership at Multiplier Advisors with you. And I love reflecting back on our time and work together at Intermountain as well. And a pleasure to be with colleagues who've been a big part of the influence on me personally in this journey, and certainly at Intermountain as well. Our story at Intermountain was really similar in some ways, though we followed John, I would say. John was a friend and colleague in this space. And as we faced questions that were quite similar to what Reggie describes in the community in Virginia, in Utah, it was really interesting to me how those things intersected for us. So Intermountain Health is a system based in Salt Lake City, Utah, with an 8-state reach in the Intermountain West. Generally speaking, when you look at the expected life expectancy, health outcomes, a healthier part of the country than some other parts of the country. And yet, when we looked through our community health needs assessment processes, which are required of all nonprofit health systems, we could see those high-level indicators of looking healthier than most other states. When we drilled deeper to look at county level, census tract level, and other more nuanced data by education, race, zip code, we saw disparities that rivaled urban places like Baltimore or some of the communities Reggie's community supports. And it was shocking to the leaders and others in our system. And so Intermountain pursued a comprehensive approach to thinking about how to impact those upstream drivers of health. And a part of the social determinants of health strategy was thinking about how to link the assets of the health system, which operated both a health plan and hospital-based system, a clinic system, and a very robust charity care program and grant-making foundation, the Community Care Foundation, and how to align those assets to improve health. So the approach at Intermountain was very much one of learning from those who'd gone before us, like Kaiser, in thinking about how to align those upstream assets, like investing, with the clinical interventions that we were making in our clinics and other settings, with those midstream investments, if you will. We had started social needs screening for our patients and members and connecting those individuals to resources in the community, and learned that housing was one of the most difficult issues for the system to address. And that as hard as our case managers and others worked in those downstream settings of trying to connect people to resources, even our grant making at the midstream, so to speak, by making grants to the housing facilitating organizations or others who were involved in connecting and referral, we weren't solving the problem of the capacity of affordable housing for the patients and members we were trying to serve. And that allowed us to shape an impact investing strategy that helped us solve that component of the problem. So the approach at Intermountain was one of first ensuring that we were focused on what were the community needs and trying to always have that drive the impact investing strategy, and then thinking about how those impact investments could be aligned in place. To your question of what's perhaps different in a regional specific approach in a health system with very specific geographic focus compared to Kaiser with breadth nationally, it was really important to ensure that the investment focus could be maintained locally. And in a part of the country where there are fewer CDFIs and others, that was really important to the organization. How do we ensure that investments could be kept local and have impact local, and that we'd be able to tell the story locally? So the process was one that was very much an approach of managing community relations, having discussions with our communities about why Intermountain was making place-based investments, and the type of impact that we wanted to have, establishing relationships with those community-based organizations that might be able to benefit from our investment portfolio. And then creating that alignment back to measurement of how could the impact investments reinforce the outcomes that we were trying to drive at a more clinical or downstream component of the work.
Thank you, Mikal. Well, really appreciate all of these responses. I think they set the context for how health comes in, social determinants of health as a framing for impact investing strategies within health organizations. At this point, I want to just thank you all and turn it back to you, Ben, for our second set of questions.
Thanks, Colby. And we're going to turn now to some of the specific investments that are being made and some of the initiatives that are being led. But Mikal, I love that reflection on the importance of stakeholder engagement as well. I think for all impact investors, stakeholder engagement is critical. And I think for healthcare organizations, there may be more experience in stakeholder engagement that other investors can learn from. So thank you for sharing that. John, I want to come back to you and dig into some of the specific investments you've made out of the Thriving Communities Fund. I loved, you talked about 10 million here, $20 million there, $50 million there, which they constitute large, I think, catalytic capital investments by any standard. And I think maybe something that our audience wouldn't quite appreciate is the scale of what you've done. And so if you could tell us a little bit more about a couple of the larger investments you've made, the rationale for those investments, and perhaps what you've learned from those investments.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, I mean, the ironic thing is some of these investments are a little bit bigger because we're actually don't have enough resources to do smaller ones. And so it's like you got to find like the big one, the big partner that could take that. and then maybe disperse it in a lot of local ways. We have a treasury department that I mentioned, but they're doing all the stocks and bonds investments that Dave talked about earlier. All of a sudden we came to them and said, free up some of this for impact investing. They said, all right, can we do a $500,000 thing here and $1 million thing there and a housing development in West Oakland? And they're like who is going to do all this? So I think we had to start, and we've only been at this really 4 or 5 years now. But I will talk about one maybe because I think of some of its complementary nature that goes in hand with a lot of stuff Mikhail talked about in terms of we're trying to drive these towards these outcomes as a health organization. And this is around affordable housing. I mentioned we have 2 domains, affordable housing and economic opportunity. And I'll talk about this one with an organization called Community Solutions. And we have been working with them for about 4 or 5 years around addressing homelessness systems in communities. Like the lack of systems really in communities around finding unhoused people, working with the shelter system, working with mental health services, working with government to make that an actual more cohesive system. And we have been partnering in different ways, including grant funding, and focus on veteran homelessness, family homeless, youth homelessness, all kinds of segments. And then they also actually happen to specialize in affordable housing investment. And they came up with this idea of, and it was very specific, like there are many veterans out there who have housing vouchers, but in many communities there aren't enough places to use it. Like landlords won't take them, or there's just not enough availability of housing units. So they said, what if we created a fund, and in this case, an equity fund and not a loan fund, that went into different communities and acquired available properties and flipped them to make them available for veteran homelessness and would accept these vouchers. And we said, we love it. That's great. They could do it at scale. We are in 8 regions across the country. They could show up in a majority of those regions. We had already been tried and true tested partners through several years of working with them on the homelessness system work. Now let's think about pairing that with affordable housing. So they had this aim of creating a $150 million-ish fund. We said, well, we'll be in for 50 million of that. And if that helps draw other institutional investors, and if we could be kind of help get going on that, we love the idea. So after a couple rounds of talking about it, and then bringing in sort of the due diligence, they created the fund, they launched it, we were first in on it, and then they started activating. And there are now a lot of successful acquisitions that have happened. In our footprint, we know like there's already over 400 units that have been preserved, 330 or so formerly homeless veterans have been housed using the model. We just really loved it, and we like the idea of how having the sort of the supply to help meet the demand here in an effective way through this acquisition model was one valuable thing we learned through this, and that we could pair it with our other activities that are a little more downstream.
What a phenomenal example and impact. I mean, the ability of Community Solutions to stand up that fund more quickly, move to action more quickly because of Kaiser coming in with that level of investment and giving the market that level of confidence is just such a wonderful achievement. Reggie, turning to you, RMHF may not have the scale of Kaiser's capital, no, obviously, but certainly the scale of influence within your community, and so the very intentional equity lens. So I would love to hear any examples you may be able to share of some of the notable investments or activities that you've catalyzed, and where you're focused then as well, based on those learnings.
Sure.
On deepening your practice. That would be great. Thanks, Reggie.
Sure. Great. So first, as I mentioned when I spoke previously, we wanted to learn, and not only learn for our benefit, but for the sake of the community. So we worked with the Reinvestment Fund to have a market value analysis done of Richmond. We actually had 2 since I've been on the board, just to sort of get a highlight or an indication of where there are opportunities for affordable housing to expand in our city or region. During the pandemic, this was new to us, but we did a $500,000 zero interest program related investment with a homeless services systems integrator here called Homeward. They were, trying to respond to the challenge that we face all over the country during the pandemic, particularly as it relates to folks who are in a housing crisis and the needy. They were anticipating their CARES Act funding, but the timing was off. So they came to us because they knew us, and we discussed how could we be of assistance in making this bridge between the time that they received the CARES Act funding, just to keep the doors open and keep those shelter options available. So that's how we did that program-related investment for them, and it worked out really well. It was a great success. We have worked with community development financial institutions with regard to affordable housing, at least $1 million. We have been able to infuse into the community with some of our housing partners. And we also have explored the intersection of health and wealth by working with a group here called Humankind that does financial assistance and credit repair for individuals who might have difficulty but are employed. So we've given them around $200,000, which led to them with others helping to create their own CDFI. So it's sort of as institutionalized a way to leverage our impact in that fashion. Those are some of the highlights. Yeah.
I love that, building the ecosystem to amplify and leverage your own capital. Thanks, Reggie. Dave, turning to you, just building off of Reggie and John's examples, and perhaps based on examples you've seen from other HAN members, what is unique about the role that healthcare organizations can play as investors and within the wider impact investing ecosystem?
Yeah, I'm going to take that one a little bit more broadly. And from our vantage point, I think the actors that are unique are anchor institutions, of which healthcare funders, like specifically convergent health foundations that are place-based funders and health systems, are a piece of that, and maybe have their own set of unique circumstances that drive their behavior. But I think what separates anchor institutions in communities from other potential investors is this place-based focus and this desire to get hyper-local. And I think especially when we talk about investment, there are transactional costs to getting hyper-local. And that's partly a product of how our financial system works. It's not intended to get to every neighborhood and zip code. It's intended to concentrate capital. It's intended to get the scale and efficiency, and all of those are not what the institutions on this call, Kaiser and the Memorial Foundation in Richmond, are trying to solve, which are really the concentrated place-based inequities that have accumulated over generations due to race and economics in our country. And so that requires an adaptive approach to creating new ecosystems of local investment, and that is every day pushing a boulder up a really steep hill. And so I think what is unique about anchors and healthcare investors in particular, health systems and health conversion foundations, is the ability to take that long view and recognize that the significant shift that needs to occur in place to actually get the change we're hoping to achieve in place. And in that process, that allows them to think about maybe longer term loans, right, than perhaps your traditional investor would allow, your traditional financial institution would provide. Or it allows them to think about a slightly below market rate for that asset class than maybe another investor might want to take. It allows them to partner differently. It allows them to sit at the table with others in the ecosystem and say, okay, what is our role in this? Because we can see the larger whole. I think in particular, what I get excited about is, yes, there are health systems like Kaiser and Intermountain that have dedicated resources to a staff person to go out and build the pipeline of projects. Not every health system is going to be able to do that. But if you have conversion health foundations like Reggie's doing that market analysis, doing that pipeline, and saying, look, health system, you don't actually need to do all of that. You just need to come to the table and partner with us, and we might take a different place in the capital stack. We might be a little bit lower rate. Then all of a sudden, everybody can play their respective role. And you have entities that are hyper-local, like Reggie's Foundation, able to then provide the pipeline to organizations like John's that might have more of a national footprint. And whether 1% is 1 million or whether 1% is 400 million, those dollars are really critical in an ecosystem that is missing that type of flexible long-term capital to address many of the challenges we're facing. And so I think that's the potential here, what I get excited about. And I think really it's just about getting the boards and getting the leadership of these institutions comfortable with the idea. And I think helping frame it within this broader vision of their role in community, rather than necessarily always focusing, every organization is going to need a slightly different framing, whether it's around addressing racial inequities, economic inequities, whether it's around focusing on place, whether it's around community first, whatever it might be, will be different depending on the geographic context and who's on the board. But I think all of those are possible. And really, we find that boards resonate powerfully with this frame and this strategy and want to do this in their communities if they're presented a pathway to doing it in a feasible way.
Thanks, Dave. I mean, really modeling a very deeply impactful form of investment that, again, I think we can all learn from. So as much as you all are learning from the impact investing ecosystem, I think there's some real mutual knowledge exchange and transfer and skill transfer that will happen here that is really exciting. Mikkel, turning to you, I'd like to circle back to the whole river paradigm that Colby had introduced, and just thinking about where health organizations are playing, because although health organizations are big, particularly in the context of place, the reality is that they don't have unlimited resources. So, as these kinds of institutions and organizations are beginning to think about where and how to be active and how to deploy limited capital, how do you prioritize where to focus, with greatest effect?
It's an important question. Thank you, Ben. I think the health systems today in a post-COVID environment are really resources are more constrained than most health system leaders have experienced in their tenure. And in that resource constrained environment, it's still really valid to be thinking about 1% of an asset portfolio. CFOs often can say, we always have a fixed income strategy inside of our management of our resources. And so if we view our impact investing portfolio similarly, it can do good along that continuum of the river while also preserving capital for the organization who has very much a forever mindset. And so for any health system, and in fact, as I led this work in my previous role, I always encouraged my community health team to think about what is the other problem to be solved. Community health leaders are always thinking about the social determinants of health and how to address these very upstream issues. But what's the top concern of the finance leader, the nursing leader, the HR leader? These are often issues of where am I going to find the workforce of the future? They can't afford to buy homes in our communities where we need them to, where we're trying to recruit them to work, or we can't find enough workforce to begin with. Or perhaps the health system is facing scrutiny over its tax exemption. And so aligning towards what are the big problems that are facing health system leaders every day at the board level, and thinking about how to align the investment strategy with some of those opportunities is the most impactful. And so I love watching health systems who are rebuilding a health facility right now, for example, and thinking about the way to make a really solid connection with their mayor, their municipal leaders to say, we're your tax exempt health system, when we build a new facility to meet the needs for the next 100 years, we're also going to think about how we redeploy those old assets to develop housing or address a need in the community that solves some things for both of us, can help with affordable housing for my recruitment needs, and can lend to addressing the housing crisis in our community, really doubling down on trying to address the things that as tax-exempt organizations we should care about, and was something we needed to be doing as a health system anyway. We needed to be rebuilding our capital. We needed to be building a better pipeline for recruitment, et cetera. So it's really about looking for where are those opportunities to look along that whole river for what are the priorities for the strategy of the health system anyway, and then how do we demand more of those things so that we're not just getting the one singular thing we might need to accomplish, recruitment, a new facility, et cetera, but how do we do both? Do something that addresses the social determinants of health for our community and that core business component of what we need to deliver on. And then that becomes very measurable inside of the core business of the operations and something the organization can track outcomes to as well.
Yeah, a great opportunity to get aligned, up and down the organization. Thanks, Mikkel. We have some time for a few questions from the audience, and we'll have to be pretty efficient in our responses to those questions. But I'll turn it over to Colby to lead the next about 10 minutes of questioning.
Thanks, Ben. Well, actually, I think, Mikkel, your comment around tracking and measurement teed us up. We're getting a lot of questions about how you all do measure outcomes or think about impact management and measurement. And so I'd love to each of you is doing it differently and you're measuring different things. So I'd love for each of you to just say a word about what does impact measurement and management mean to you? How are you measuring what frameworks you're using to do that and how you think about the outcomes? Pick one of those things in your response. Maybe we'll start. Reggie, you came off mute. Let's start with you.
Sure.
That's perfect.
Well, thank you, Colby. But I'm learning a lot too from Mikkel, John, and Dave about this. And quite honestly, we are trying to figure out how to measure this work. We just had a retreat with our trustees this Friday and Saturday just past, and that was one of the main topics. One of the things that at this point we're looking at is policies that shift, upstream, midstream. We're trying to fund organizations that are in that policy space. So hopefully over the next year or two, we can see that as a direct or indirect result of our support of the folks who are on the front line with the policy work, we see opportunities and doors that open with new legislation or modifications to legislation that make life easier from a racial or health perspective for our community. So that's where we are now, but we're still trying to fine-tune that measurement approach.
Thanks, Reggie. And Mikkel, I want to go back to you because I know Intermountain was using IRIS as one of their ways to track and measure outcomes. Love to hear a little bit more about how you did that and how perhaps your CHNA provided a framework for measuring against that, your community health needs assessment.
Well, I'll start by saying measurement is expensive in time and attention and the resources it takes to dedicate to it. So I think having that alignment around what are the priorities that you're going to focus on measuring is most important. And IRIS provides a great framework for identifying those measures that have consistency across the field and allows for health systems to focus on which aspects do they want to measure. And what I think is really valuable is to think about in that construct, what are the things we're measuring already through different vehicles? So there's certain publicly available measures you might be able to measure at a population level health outcome that then track to an indicator that a health plan might measure through its required indicators through HEDIS, and then measures that grant making can require of other organizations that are around that could be assembled around an impact investment to overlay measurement of the specific beneficiaries of the impact investment work, and think about that alignment. So it's really important to create a prioritization, a framework, and then think about what are those different measurement sources that could all feed into that same component.
Thanks, Mikkel. John, I'm thinking about, Kaiser Permanente, your Thriving Communities Fund, your Treasury is working hand in hand along with community health. You're thinking about the financial, portfolio management in general, an overview of that. I'd love to hear more how that comes into your work at the Thriving Communities Fund.
Yeah, I agree with the previous comments around the challenge of measuring this. It's interesting because I think we don't need to prove that providing housing and shelter is going to improve someone's health. We don't need to prove that someone getting a job is going to improve their well-being, their security, the health benefits, all of that. We don't need to prove that entrepreneurship builds wealth. So there is some evidence spaces that we go into and why we chose some of the investment types that we want to do. There's also some advantage to finding sophisticated partners who have evaluation mindsets, who think about measurement and learning. So we partner with a group like Enterprise Community Partners and give them a fund to create housing investments, and then they can bring some machinery to that. But right now, we're still in this space of measuring kind of outputs, widgets, if you will, the number of investments, the number of housing units, the number of jobs created through the investments. And Treasury, of course, keeps its eye on some of the financial returns and creating some kind of balanced portfolio. We're going to have really concessionary returns on this investment, but maybe on this one's a partner will be willing to go a little bit higher. So it balances out so that we can bring some of that money back and recycle it and get it invested. But in terms of really measuring outcomes like access to more equitable opportunity, improving quality and length of life, catalyzing others to do, make our investments 3x, 5x, 10x. Those are just, we're still trying to figure that out. And I think we'd love to explore more of the field here beyond what healthcare is doing in this, especially to figure this out. And then we try to find that nice marriage between us and our finance department to kind of bring that all together.
Great, John. And I really appreciate the comments that, there's more to do to help build the infrastructure for measurement and outcome portfolio management, impact management, and measurement here. Dave, Han has played a leading role in helping to collect data around impact and produce reports across the membership. Would love to hear from you about how you think about measurement, impact, and financial.
Sure. So there's a tension here we should name, which is that if, obviously healthcare wants to show improvements in community health and well-being, and that is challenging to do when you're focused as far upstream as you are, right? Because it's one investment within an ecosystem, and how does that directly benefit the people who get that housing? And then there's ethical concerns about tracking at that level of the people who get that housing as a condition, and how much are you controlling who gets that housing? So all of those things. So and one of the things we really encourage in Han is that for it to count as a place-based investment in our yearly data collection, it has to be below market rate for the asset class. It has to be addressing a community need, and it can't exclusively benefit your employees, patients, or plan members. And it can't exclusively be focused on just healthcare access for your own organization. So it really has to be community focused. And obviously it could be some of your employees can get housing there. You're increasing the stock of workforce housing, affordable housing for obviously your patients, et cetera. But it needs to be more broad focus in terms of the intervention. And I think that's important, because otherwise we run the risk of not working constructively and collectively in place to solve the systemic challenges we face, and we're just going to chase the small interventions that will create the highest return and margin for for a health benefit down the line. And I think that's a dangerous place to go with this. So we focus in the moment around dollars allocated, dollars invested, to what sectors: housing, community economic development, food access, education, where are those dollars going? And then we start to ask our members around how many units of affordable housing has that helped create, what types of jobs is that creating? And then I think there are attribution issues. If you're one investor in a fund with 20 others, how much of that housing do you claim as your own? And so for us, it's more at the story level and helping to demonstrate the impact that can come from this, because I think we are really seeing some transformative projects occur that would not have occurred without the investment dollars from either a health foundation or a health system being part of the table.
Great. Thank you, Dave. I know we are close to time, and so Ben, over to you to close us out today.
Thanks, Colby. One final lightning round, and we'll go through John, Reggie, Dave, Mikkel. Making investments is obviously very different to the other ways that healthcare organizations and systems are having community benefit: grant making, supply diversity, workforce, public advocacy, the kind of things we've talked about. What's the most important lesson you've learned about what it takes to successfully introduce and operationalize an impact investing initiative within an organization that's not necessarily set up for impact investing? So what have you learned, John, starting with you?
Just to be pithy, I think learning each other's language and like what floats your boat. Like us in community health are driven by one thing, Treasury is driven by another thing, this other part. And so when you all have to come together, like what's gonna like speak to each other, what's gonna resonate, and then what's that common thing in the middle to help drive you all.
I love it, John. Thank you. Reggie?
Just like John, learning for us, it was making sure that we were listening to what the community felt we should do with our power. Let's use that word. We had equity and health fellows that informed people from the community, that informed how we could make an impact. And the good news is our board and trustees listened to their suggestions, which led to things like general operating support and being open to more impact investing strategies.
Right. Thank you, Reggie. Dave?
Until it's a strategy, it's no one's job. And so it really needs to be a cross-team effort, the way that John and Reggie communicated, and then getting the board involved somehow will really help accelerate it. And then ensuring community partners are engaged at the beginning will help get to projects more quickly.
Right. Thanks, Dave. And Mikkel, the final word to you.
Patience and timing is sometimes important. Building on those relationships and common language, there's sometimes the right time. So keep trying, keep working at it, because it usually will play out.
Right. Well, thank you, Mikkel, and thank you to all our panelists. Thank you, Colby. Thank you to the Tideline production crew in the background, Olivia and Yael, and thank you to our audience. We so appreciate you being with us and look forward to seeing you for our next Compass series, and enjoy the rest of your days. Thanks so much. Bye for now.
Thank you.